Take this fat disappointment!" Her father screamed at the giant Apache handing over his daughter. The whole town saw it. But no one saw what came after. She wasn't just some girl cast aside. She carried something deeper than shame. And the man beside her? He didn't flinch, didn't speak, but he wasn't backing down. They thought they could humiliate her and be done. But something sacred had already been set in motion, something written in vows, sealed in fire, and bound to land no man could steal. Now the town's about to learn, some promises can't be broken. When dust rises and the church bell tolls, who decides what's right and what's worth fighting for? Every story begins with a heartbeat. Tell me, where are you in the world today? And how are you really doing? Your words make this space feel more human. The morning sun cast long shadows across San Pedro Crossing as churchgoers made their way up the worn wooden steps of the whitewashed church. Starched collars gleamed, and polished boots clicked against the weathered planks. The air held the crisp promise of autumn, carrying the scent of sage and morning dew. Mary Beth Billings stood at the edge of the churchyard, her heart drumming against her ribs. The familiar weight of her Sunday dress seemed heavier today, its navy cotton pressing against her full figure as she smoothed nervous hands over the fabric. Beside her, Wesanate stood tall and dignified in his best white cotton shirt and dark trousers, his long black hair neatly tied back. His presence steadied her like a mountain against the wind. When his fingers found hers, warm and sure, Mary Beth drew strength from their connection. 3 weeks of secret joy had led to this moment. 3 weeks of knowing she was finally, truly seen by someone who valued her heart above all else. The murmur of morning greetings and shuffling feet filled the air as the congregation filtered into the church. Mary Beth took a deep breath, ready to step forward, when the heavy wooden door burst open. Her father, Hank Billings, emerged like a thundercloud, his face twisted with fury as his gaze landed on their joined hands. "No." The word cut through the morning quiet like a knife. "No daughter of mine." Before Mary Beth could speak, Hank yanked the bonnet from her head with such force that hairpins scattered across the dirt. He hurled it at her feet, his voice rising to a roar that echoed across the churchyard. "Take this fat disappointment." Gasps rippled through the gathering. Women clutched their prayer books tighter. Men shifted uncomfortably. Inside the church, Reverend Matthews stood frozen mid-sentence at his pulpit, his Bible hanging forgotten in his hands. Weiser's grip tightened protectively around Mary Beth's fingers, but his voice remained calm and clear as summer water. "Mary Beth is my wife." The words settled over the crowd like a stone dropped in a still pond. More gasps. Someone dropped a hymnal. Mrs. Peterson, who had always slipped Mary Beth extra cookies after Sunday school, pressed a hand to her chest. Mary Beth felt the weight of every stare, but Weiser's steady presence gave her courage. Her voice shook but grew stronger with each word. "We were married 3 weeks ago, in the Apache way. I've been teaching Bible verses at the reservation, and we fell in love." "Love." Hank spat the word like poison. His face had turned the color of storm clouds, veins standing out on his neck. "You bring shame on this family, consorting with—" "I bring no shame," Mary Beth interrupted, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "Weiser knows the scriptures better than most. He respects the land, respects me. We share the same faith, the same—" "Faith?" Hank's laugh was bitter as winter wind. "You've lost your mind, girl, lost your dignity. Get out of my sight." The church steps creaked as people began to move, some hurrying inside to avoid the scene, others lingering with expressions ranging from scandalized horror to quiet sympathy. Old Tom Wheeler, who had known Mary Beth since she was knee-high, looked between father and daughter with sad eyes before turning away. Reverend Matthews finally found his voice. "Now, Brother Billings, perhaps we should—" "Don't Brother Billings me!" Hank's boot kicked the fallen bonnet, sending it spinning into the dust. "No daughter who'd shame herself like this has any right to my name. You're no blood of mine anymore, you hear? No blood of mine!" Each word struck like a physical blow, but Mary Beth stood her ground. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she wouldn't let them fall. Not here. Not now. The memory of her mother's last words came to her. Stay true to your heart, sweet girl. It's the finest compass God gave us. Weisa's thumb traced gentle circles on her palm, a reminder that she wasn't alone. He hadn't moved, hadn't flinched at Hank's fury. His dignity in the face of such hatred only confirmed what her heart had known from the start. The morning service dissolved into whispers and shifting feet. Reverend Matthews attempted to call everyone inside, but the damage was done. The congregation trickled through the doors in twos and threes, shooting furtive glances over their shoulders. Hank remained on the steps, his chest heaving. For a moment, Mary Beth caught something in his eyes, a flicker of pain beneath the rage, gone so quick she might have imagined it. Then his face hardened again, and he turned his back, stomping into the church without another word. The slam of the heavy door echoed across the now empty churchyard. Mary Beth's legs trembled, threatening to give way, but Weisa's arm slipped around her waist, supporting her without a word. Together they walked away from the church, away from the whispers and stares, toward the dusty edge of town where the sage-dotted hills rolled toward the horizon. The morning sun warmed their backs, and a meadowlark's song cut through the heavy silence. Mary Beth's heart ached with each step, but she didn't regret her choice. She thought of the quiet evenings spent teaching at the reservation, of Weisa's gentle explanations of his people's ways, of the growing understanding between them that had bloomed into something beautiful and true. Their love might not fit into the neat boxes her father and the town understood, but it was real as the ground beneath their feet. As they reached the edge of town, Weisa finally spoke, his voice soft but certain. "You are strong, Mary Beth Nate." The sound of her new name, spoken with such reverence, soothed some of the morning's raw edges. She squeezed his hand, drawing comfort from its warmth. They had known this day would come, had prepared their hearts for it, but the reality still stung like alkali dust in a wound. The town grew smaller behind them as they walked on, their shadows stretching out ahead, joining together on the sun-baked earth. They were bound now, not just by Apache ceremony, but by the shared weight of this morning, by their choice to stand firm in the face of prejudice and pain. Their hearts were heavy, but their steps were sure, carrying them forward together into whatever lay ahead. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty path as Weisa and Mary Beth made their way to the edge of San Pedro Crossing. Their feet kicked up small clouds with each step, the dry earth still warm from the day's heat. The distant hills shimmered like copper in the fading light. Weisa led them to a weather-beaten line shack, little more than wooden walls and a slanting roof, that sat alone against the scrubland. The wooden boards had gone silver with age, and patches of rot showed near the foundation. But it was shelter, left behind by his uncle years ago when the cattle runs changed. "It ain't much," Mary Beth said softly, running her hand along the rough-hewn doorframe. "But it's something." Weisa nodded, his dark eyes gentle. "My uncle would be glad to know it serves a purpose again." Inside, the air was still and warm. A tiny iron stove sat in one corner, its pipe stretching up through the roof. Mary Beth busied herself with what little they had, some dried beans, cornmeal, and salt pork she'd kept in her satchel. Her hands moved with practiced ease, even as her mind still echoed with the morning's harsh words. As the sun dipped lower, coyotes began their evening song, their yips and howls floating across the desert air. Weisa struck a match and carefully lit a kerosene lamp, its warm glow pushing back the growing darkness. The flame caught the worry in Mary Beth's eyes as she stirred the beans. Without a word, Weisa retrieved a thick wool blanket, his last one, from his saddlebag. He draped it gently around Mary Beth's shoulders, his touch lingering for a moment. "You need this more than me," she protested, but he shook his head. "I have known many cold nights," he said simply. "Tonight, you need warmth." They ate their simple supper from tin plates, sitting close together on an old crate. The beans were plain but filling, and Mary Beth had managed to make the cornmeal into passable johnny cakes. The familiar tasks of cooking had settled her some, though her heart still ached. "Tomorrow," Weser said, breaking their comfortable silence, "we ride to Duston Ridge. The county office there can record our marriage properly." Marybeth nodded, hope warming her voice. "And then no one can deny what we are to each other." She paused, stirring the last bits of beans on her plate. "I've been thinking. That patch of land your uncle left you, we could build something there, a real home." "With a garden," Weser added, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. "And perhaps a proper roof that doesn't leak, and windows that catch the morning sun." Marybeth's eyes grew distant with the vision. "It won't be fancy, but it'll be ours." They spent the evening planning in soft voices, sharing dreams of a future built with their own hands. When sleep finally came, it was with hope, despite the hard wooden floor beneath them. Dawn found them already mounted and heading west, their horses' hooves raising small clouds of dust on the trail to Duston Ridge. The morning air was cool, carrying the scent of sage and promises. Marybeth sat straight in her saddle, her dark riding skirt arranged modestly despite the circumstances. Beside her, Weser rode with the easy grace of someone born to horseback. The sun climbed higher as they travelled, baking the earth and forcing them to rest the horses several times. They shared water from a canteen and small bits of jerky, speaking little but drawing comfort from each other's presence. It was late afternoon when they finally rode into Duston Ridge. The county office sat squat and official on the main street, its windows reflecting the sun like stern eyes. Marybeth's stomach tightened as they dismounted and tied their horses to the hitching post. Inside, the office was dim and paper-stuffy. A clerk looked up from his desk, his round spectacles catching the light. His expression shifted from bored to sharp when he saw them, his thin mouth pressing into a line. "Can I help you?" His tone suggested he'd rather not. "We're here to register our marriage," Marybeth said, stepping forward. Her voice was steady, though her hands twisted in her skirts. The clerk's eyebrows rose. "Marriage, you say? And when was this ceremony?" 3 weeks past," Weser answered, his deep voice calm. "In the Apache way, with all proper respect to traditions." The clerk's chair creaked as he leaned back, folding his hands over his vest. "I see. And do you have any white witnesses to this arrangement?" Marybeth's heart sank. "No, but then I'm afraid I can't help you." The clerk's voice turned hard. "Apache treaty recognition don't mean spit without a town official's signature, and I don't see any of those neither." "But surely—" Marybeth started. The clerk cut her off with a raised hand. "Furthermore, you should know that land claims connected to mixed unions are under review by the Territory Board." His eyes narrowed. "Seems there's been some concern about certain people trying to grab up land through questionable means." The insult hung in the air like smoke. Weser's shoulders stiffened, but his voice remained level. "The land was left to me by my uncle. It is recorded." "Records can change," the clerk said, turning back to his papers with deliberate dismissal. "I'd think carefully about pursuing this situation any further." Marybeth felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she wouldn't let them fall. Not here. Not in front of this small man with his small mind. She felt Weser's hand brush her elbow, gentle but firm, guiding her towards the door. The ride back was slower, the weight of rejection hanging heavy between them. When they stopped at a creek bed to water the horses, the afternoon sun was painting the hills in shades of gold and shadow. The water burbled softly over smooth stones, a gentle sound that seemed to mock their troubled hearts. Marybeth slid from her saddle, her legs stiff from riding. She watched the horses drink, their heads bobbing as they pulled at the sweet water. Behind her, Weser's boots crunched on the gravel. "It will be harder than we thought," she said quietly, not turning around. "Yes." His simple answer held no judgment, no fear, just acceptance of the truth. When his hand touched her shoulder, Marybeth turned and leaned into him, pressing her face against the rough cotton of his shirt. His arms came around her, strong and sure. Together they sank to their knees on the creek bank. No words were needed as they prayed, their hearts lifting the same plea to heaven. The creek murmured its endless song, and somewhere a dove called to its mate. Mary Beth felt the solid warmth of Wisa's shoulder beneath her cheek, and knew that whatever battle lay ahead, she wouldn't face it alone. The sun was sinking behind the mountains when Wisa and Mary Beth rode back into San Pedro Crossing. Long shadows stretched across the dusty streets, and most shops had already closed their doors for the night. Their horses' hooves clicked against packed earth, the sound hollow in the evening quiet. As they passed the sheriff's office, Mary Beth noticed a fresh posting on the wooden door. "Wisa, wait!" she called softly, pulling her horse to a stop. She squinted at the notice in the fading light. Wisa dismounted and stepped closer to read the paper. His shoulders tensed as his eyes moved down the page. "Town ordinance," he said, his voice low and controlled. "All mixed-tribe marriages require investigation and approval." Mary Beth slid from her saddle, her skirts rustling as she joined him. "What does that mean for us?" "It means they can seize the land." Wisa's words carried the weight of generations who had heard similar threats. "My uncle's creek property, the spring water there, they're reviewing it for reallocation." "To whom?" Mary Beth asked, though dread already coiled in her stomach. "The railroad." Wisa touched the paper gently, as if it might bite. "They want the water rights." Mary Beth's hand found his in the growing darkness. "We need help," she whispered. "Someone who knows the old ways, the treaties." Wisa nodded slowly. "Reverend Alden. He served on the reservation before his leg was injured. He might remember." "Go to him," Mary Beth said, squeezing his hand. "I need to fetch my Bible and sewing things from home. We'll need them, whatever comes." They parted at the crossroads, Wisa heading toward the small house behind the church where Reverend Alden lived, while Mary Beth turned toward her father's ranch. The evening air grew cooler, carrying the scent of sage and wood smoke. Reverend Alden's home glowed with lamplight when Wisa approached. He knocked softly on the weathered door, and after a moment heard the uneven step of the preacher's gate. The door opened to reveal Ezra Alden's thin frame, his kind eyes bright despite the late hour. "Wisa," the Reverend said warmly, recognition lighting his face. Come in." He stepped back, leaning heavily on his cane. Inside, books lined every wall, their leather spines catching the lamplight. The Reverend gestured to a worn armchair while lowering himself carefully into his own seat. "I heard about this morning at the church," he said gently, "and I suspect you're not here just to pass the time." Wisa sat straight, his hands resting on his knees. "We need help, Reverend. They posted a new ordinance about mixed marriages. They're trying to take the spring land." The old preacher's eyes narrowed. The railroad's been sniffing around water rights all through the territory. He shifted, reaching for a stack of papers on a nearby table. "But there was an appendix to the old treaty, something about protecting established family claims regardless of tribal status. I remember it caused quite a stir when it was added." "Can you find it?" Wisa asked, hope threading through his voice. "I'll search through every paper and book I have," Reverend Alden promised, his weathered hand gripping his cane tighter. "The truth is still truth, Wisa, even when men try to bury it. Your marriage to Mary Beth is sacred in God's eyes, and no ordinance can change that." Meanwhile, Mary Beth stood before her childhood home, gathering her courage. The house looked different now, colder somehow, despite the warm light in the windows. She climbed the familiar porch steps and knocked on the door she had passed through thousands of times before. Heavy footsteps approached, and then her father filled the doorway. Hank Billings' face was like stone as he looked down at his daughter. "Papa," Mary Beth said softly, "I've come for my Bible and my sewing things." For a long moment he just stared at her, his eyes hard. Then he spoke, each word falling like a hammer blow. "You ain't my kin." The door closed with a final thud, leaving Mary Beth alone on the porch. She stood there, feeling the rough boards beneath her feet, hearing the crickets begin their evening song. Tears pressed at her eyes, but she blinked them back. As she turned to leave, movement caught her attention. Through the side window she saw her father speaking with a well-dressed stranger, a man in a fine city coat who carried a surveyor's case. Under his arm was tucked a map tube, its brass end catching the lamplight. They stood close together, heads bent in serious discussion. The sight sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the evening air. Mary Beth hurried down the steps and into the gathering darkness, her empty hands clutched together. The road seemed longer now, dustier, as she made her way back to where Weese waited. She found him standing outside the lean-to, his tall frame outlined against the stars that had begun to appear. When she drew closer, he opened his arms, and she stepped into them, letting out a shaky breath. "Your father?" Weese asked quietly. "He wouldn't even let me get my things." She whispered against his shirt. Then she pulled back slightly, looking up at him. There was a man there, someone from the city, with surveying equipment and maps. They were talking in private. Weese's arms tightened around her. "Reverend Alden thinks he can help. He remembers something in the old treaties about protecting family land claims, even across tribal lines. He's going to search for it." Mary Beth nodded, drawing strength from his steadiness. "Then we pray, and we wait." She glanced at their humble shelter, then back to her husband's face. "And we hold on to what's ours." The night settled around them like a blanket, the desert wind whispering through the sage. In the distance, a coyote called, a lonely sound that echoed across the empty spaces between what was and what would be. But they stood together, their shadows merged into one by the rising moon, facing whatever tomorrow might bring. The morning sun painted long shadows across the reservation schoolhouse as Mary Beth arranged worn primers on the rough-hewn desks. Her fingers traced the familiar scratches in the wood, memories of happier days warming her heart. The door creaked open, and small faces peered in. "Miss Mary Beth!" Little Sarah Two Rivers burst through the doorway, her dark braids bouncing. Other children followed, their excited chatter filling the one-room building. "We missed you!" Mary Beth's eyes misted as tiny arms wrapped around her waist. "I missed you too, children." She smoothed Sarah's hair, noting how the girl's mother had woven bright beads into the braids. "Shall we begin with our reading?" The morning passed in a pleasant blur of lessons and laughter. The children seemed eager to show how well they'd kept up with their studies, and Mary Beth's heart swelled with pride. But as she stood at the blackboard, demonstrating letters, a wave of dizziness washed over her. She steadied herself against the desk, hoping none of the children noticed. Later, walking through town to fetch supplies, Mary Beth felt the weight of hostile stares. At the general store, Mrs. Peterson deliberately turned her back, speaking loudly to another customer about certain people who don't know their place. The clerk kept his eyes down, ignoring her presence until she placed her coins directly in his hand. Outside, she passed the blacksmith shop, just as Weese was leading their horse away, his jaw set in a hard line. The blacksmith stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "Won't serve your kind here," the man called out. "Try the next town over." Weese's shoulders remained straight, his dignity unshaken, but Mary Beth saw the tension in his hands as he gripped the horse's reins. Another spell of light-headedness struck her, and she pressed a hand to her forehead. That evening, in their humble lean-to, Mary Beth stirred a pot of bean soup over their small stove. The metal spoon felt unusually heavy in her hand. "You're tired," Weese observed quietly from where he sat mending a bridle. "Just a little dizzy now and then," she admitted, settling onto their only chair. "It will pass." Weese set aside his work and knelt beside her. "You should rest. The children will understand if you need a day away." But Mary Beth shook her head, forcing a smile. "I'm fine, truly. Teaching those children, it's one of the few things that still feels right." The next morning, after Weese left to check their spring water claim, Mary Beth made her way to Dr. Winston's office. The wooden steps creaked under her feet as she climbed to the second floor above the pharmacy. Dr. Winston looked up from his desk, his weathered face neutral. "Mrs. Billings," he said, then caught himself. "Or is it Mrs. Nate now?" "Either is fine, Doctor." Mary Beth twisted her hands in her skirt. "I've been feeling unwell." The old physician gestured to the examination table. "Tell me your symptoms." As Mary Beth described the dizziness and fatigue, Dr. Winston's expression grew more focused. He checked her pulse, listened to her breathing, and examined her carefully. When he stepped back, his stern face had softened with concern. "Well," he said, pulling up his chair, "there are two things you need to know." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "First, you're carrying a child. I'd estimate about 6 weeks along." Mary Beth's hand flew to her mouth, joy and fear mingling in her chest. "Second," the doctor continued, his voice growing more serious, "you're severely anemic. Your blood is weak, Mrs. Nate, and that's dangerous for both you and the baby." The room seemed to spin slightly. What can I do?" "Rest, lots of it. And you need iron, red meat, liver if you can get it, dark, leafy greens." He scribbled on a prescription pad. "I'm giving you an iron tonic, but you must understand. This pregnancy will be risky. Without proper rest and care, you could lose the child." Mary Beth clutched the prescription, her fingers trembling. "Thank you, Doctor. I mean it about the rest," he added as she stood to leave. "No more teaching for now. No heavy work. Your body needs all its strength for this baby." The walk home passed in a daze. Mary Beth's mind whirled with thoughts of tiny fingers and soft breaths, mixed with fears of what might go wrong. Their lean-to seemed especially shabby now, hardly fit for a newborn. How would they manage? Rain began to fall as evening approached, pattering against the tin roof in a gentle rhythm. Weezer returned, shaking water from his coat. He took one look at Mary Beth's face and knew something had changed. "What is it?" he asked softly, settling beside her on their narrow bed. Mary Beth took a deep breath, her hand unconsciously moving to her stomach. "I saw Dr. Winston today." She met her husband's concerned gaze. "Wessa, I'm going to have a baby." His eyes widened, and something like wonder crossed his face. Then he noticed her trembling hands. "There's more?" She nodded, explaining about the anemia and the doctor's warnings. "He says I need rest, good food, that I could lose the baby if—" Her voice caught. Weezer slid from the bed to kneel before her, taking her hands in his. His eyes closed briefly, and when he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "Thank you, Creator, for this blessing." He opened his eyes to look at Mary Beth. "We will find a way. The baby will be strong, like its mother." Mary Beth's tears finally spilled over. "I'm scared, Weezer. We have so little, and now—" He gathered her into his arms, and they held each other as the rain drummed overhead. Their fears and hopes mingled in the growing darkness, fears of what hardships lay ahead, hopes for the new life growing despite it all. "My father's people have a saying," Weezer murmured against her hair. "Every child is a new sunrise, a promise that life goes on." His hand covered hers where it rested on her stomach. "This little one is our sunrise." They stayed like that for a long while, listening to the rain and sharing wordless prayers for their child's future. Outside, the world might be harsh and unwelcoming, but in their humble shelter, love and hope bloomed like desert flowers after a storm. The morning light streamed through the gaps in the lean-to's weathered walls as Weezer examined the rough planking. His skilled hands moved along the wood, testing weak spots and noting what needed repair. The old cedar boards groaned under his touch, but he saw potential in their sturdy grain. From her place on their narrow bed, Mary Beth watched as her husband gathered his tools. "Be careful with those nails," she said softly. "They're all we have left." Weezer nodded, already focused on his work. The rhythmic sound of his hammer filled the air as he reinforced the walls, piece by piece. During breaks, he turned his attention to a collection of salvaged cedar planks he'd gathered from behind the sawmill. His knife moved with practiced precision, carving gentle curves that would soon form a cradle. "It will be beautiful," Marybeth murmured, watching the wood take shape beneath his careful hands. Around midday, while Weezer worked outside, Marybeth found a folded paper that had been slipped under their door. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The message, scratched in crude letters, made her blood run cold. "Keep your half-breed baby out of our town, or it won't see the light." She quickly crumpled the note and threw it into the stove, her heart pounding. Through the window, she could see Weezer still working, unaware. The thought of telling him, of adding another burden to his shoulders, was too much to bear. Later that afternoon, while Weezer hauled water from the creek, Marybeth made her way to Reverend Alden's small house behind the church. The old preacher opened his door before she could knock, as if he'd been expecting her. "Come in, child," he said, noting her troubled expression. "Something's weighing on your heart." Inside his modest study, Marybeth told him about the threatening note. The Reverend's kind face grew grave as he listened. "Have you told Weezer?" he asked, already knowing the answer from her expression. "I can't," she whispered. "He carries enough worry already." Reverend Alden sighed, his worn Bible open on the desk before him. "Secrets between husband and wife are like thorns in a garden, Marybeth. They only grow sharper with time." "I know," she admitted, "but just give me time to find the right moment." Sunday arrived with a heavy atmosphere hanging over the church. Marybeth and Weezer sat in the back pew, where they'd taken to sitting since their marriage became known. As the service drew to a close, Hank Billings stood up, his voice cutting through the quiet like a knife. "I got something to say to the town council," he announced, turning to face the congregation. "My daughter ain't right in the head. Never has been. This so-called marriage of hers ain't valid on account of her being mentally unsound." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the church. Marybeth felt Weezer's hand tighten around hers. "I'm petitioning to have this marriage nullified," Hank continued, his voice hard. "Got the papers right here, signed and witnessed. Time to set things right." Reverend Alden stepped forward from the pulpit. "Brother Billings, this is neither the time nor the place." "It's exactly the place." Hank shot back. "Where else but God's house to right a wrong?" Marybeth stood, her voice quiet but clear. "The only wrong here is a father's hatred for his own flesh and blood." But Hank had already stormed out, leaving his petition papers with the town clerk who served on the council. The damage was done. An inquiry would have to follow now that a formal complaint had been filed. That evening, as lamps began to glow in the saloon windows, Weezer waited in the shadows of the hitching post. When Hank emerged, swaying slightly from his drinks, Weezer stepped into his path. Hank's hand instinctively moved toward his belt, but Weezer made no aggressive move. Instead, he stood straight and tall, his voice carrying the weight of ancient wisdom. "You will reap what you plant," he said simply, his dark eyes fixed on Hank's face. Hank tried to sneer, but something in Weezer's calm dignity seemed to unsettle him. "That a threat, Indian?" "No," Weezer replied. "It is truth. Every seed we plant grows into its true nature. Hatred yields bitter fruit." He turned and walked away, leaving Hank standing alone in the dusty street. Those who witnessed the exchange later swore they saw Hank's hands shaking as he mounted his horse. The next morning's dawn brought an unexpected discovery. On their doorstep lay a carefully wrapped package. Inside, Marybeth found a lovingly crafted baby blanket, soft and warm, and a loaf of fresh apple bread still carrying the scent of cinnamon. "Someone in town still has a heart," she said, running her fingers over the blanket's delicate stitching. Weezer examined the gifts carefully before allowing them inside. Recent events had taught them to be cautious, even with kindness. But the blanket was clean and well made, the bread wholesome and fresh. "Not everyone follows the path of fear," he said, breaking off a piece of bread to share with his wife. They ate in thoughtful silence, the morning sun warming their small home. The cradle was taking shape in the corner, its smooth curves promising comfort for their coming child. Despite the threats, despite Hank's cruel petition, they found strength in these small signs of support, proof that love could still flourish in the hardest ground. Marybeth watched as Weezer returned to his carving, his strong hands shaping the wood with tender care. The threatening note still weighed heavy in her heart, but seeing him work, seeing his quiet determination to build a safe place for their child, gave her courage. Whatever storms gathered on the horizon, they would weather them together. 2 days after Hank's confrontation at the saloon, a polished black buggy rolled into San Pedro Crossing, its wheels stirring dust along the main street. Railroad agent Lionel Hayes stepped down first, his city boots gleaming. Behind him, a county official clutched a leather portfolio stuffed with papers. "Ma'am?" Hayes tipped his hat as he passed Marybeth on her way to draw water. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Just here to survey some disputed claims. Nothing to trouble yourself about." Marybeth watched them head toward the spring-fed creek that marked the edge of Weeser's inherited land. Her heart sank. That evening, when Weeser returned from chopping wood, she told him about the visitors. "The tribal council in Tucson sent word," Weeser said quietly, setting down his axe. "They want me to speak about the inheritance. 2 days' ride, there and back." Marybeth's hand went instinctively to her middle. "When?" "Tomorrow at first light." Weeser knelt beside her chair. "I don't want to leave you." "You must go," she insisted, though her voice trembled. "We need the land recognized. The baby will need a proper home." That night, Marybeth tossed and turned on their narrow bed. Her bones ached with a deep tiredness that seemed to seep into her very core. When Weezer rose before dawn, she tried to get up to fix him breakfast, but dizziness forced her back down. "Rest," he commanded gently, pressing a cup of water into her hands. "I'll return as quick as I can." She watched from the doorway as he rode away, his strong figure silhouetted against the rising sun. The day passed slowly. Her symptoms grew worse. Headaches, weakness, spots dancing before her eyes. She managed to keep down only a little bread and water. The second night alone, Marybeth woke in a cold sweat. Something was wrong. The air felt thick, hard to breathe. Smoke. Her eyes flew open to see orange flames licking up the wall beside her. Fear gave her strength she didn't know she had. She rolled from the bed, staying low where the air was clearer. The heat pressed against her like a physical weight. Clutching her abdomen protectively, she crawled toward the door on trembling arms. Through the windows, she could see shapes moving in the pre-dawn light. Neighbors standing in their nightclothes, watching. No one stepped forward to help. The flames roared louder, consuming the dry wood of their humble home. "Help!" she tried to call, but smoke filled her lungs. She doubled over, coughing. Just as the roof timbers began to crackle ominously, strong hands grabbed her shoulders, dragging her backward. A stranger's voice spoke near her ear. "Come on now, miss. This ain't no place to linger." She stumbled away from the burning shack, supported by the unknown man. Behind them came a tremendous crash as the roof collapsed in a shower of sparks. Marybeth watched in horror as flames devoured Weeser's carefully carved cradle, their few precious books, every small comfort they'd gathered. The stranger steadied her, then melted away into the gathering crowd before she could thank him. Her vision swam. The world tilted sidewardly. "Lord have mercy!" Reverend Alden's voice cut through her daze. She felt his weathered hands catch her as her knees gave way. Someone fetch the doctor. But darkness was already closing in. The last thing Marybeth heard was the Reverend's voice raised in anger. "You'll stand there and watch a woman burn? God sees your hearts this day." The sun was high when Weeser's horse thundered back into town. He'd ridden hard after seeing smoke rising from the direction of their home. The sight that greeted him stopped his heart. A pile of smoking rubble where their shack had stood, and Marybeth lying unconscious in the back of Reverend Alden's wagon. "She's breathing," the Reverend assured him quickly. Doc Winston's been tending her. The baby still lives, but she needs real rest now. Real care. Weezer knelt beside the wagon, taking Mary Beth's limp hand. Her face was smudged with soot, her breathing shallow. Their home, the cradle he'd carved with such hope, everything was gone. But his wife lived, their child lived, and in that moment, that was enough. "Bring her to my house," Reverend Alden said firmly. "Sarah's already making up the spare room. We'll see her through this." Weezer gathered Mary Beth's still form in his arms, cradling her against his chest as carefully as a newborn. Together they made their way toward the Reverend's modest home, leaving behind the ashes of one life and stepping uncertainly toward another. The town doctor's clinic sat at the end of Oak Street, a weathered two-story building with peeling white paint. Inside, Dr. Winston worked through the night, his wrinkled hand steady as he tended to Mary Beth. The smoke had taken a harsh toll on her already weakened body. Outside, Weezer kept his vigil. He sat against the wall beneath the clinic's window, wrapped in a blanket against the autumn chill. His dark eyes never left the door. "Sir," the receptionist had said earlier, her voice tight with discomfort. "We have strict ordinances about tribal persons inside the clinic. I'm sure you understand." Weezer had nodded once, then taken his place outside without argument. Hour after hour he watched townspeople come and go. Some cast sideways glances. Others pretended not to see him at all. Near midnight, boots crunched on gravel. Deputy Morris approached, flanked by two other men. His hand rested on his gun belt. "Stand up slow now," Morris ordered. "You're under arrest." Weezer rose carefully, keeping his movements deliberate. "What charges?" "Trespassing, for one, resisting town ordinance, and suspected arson of your own property. Mighty suspicious timing, you riding out just before the fire started." Morris produced a pair of iron handcuffs. "This is outrageous!" Reverend Alden emerged from the shadows, his limp more pronounced in his haste. "You know full well Weezer had nothing to do with that fire." "Stay out of this, Reverend," Morris warned. "Man's got no legal right to be here anyway, what with that marriage being under investigation." "He has every right. His wife is fighting for her life in there." Alden's voice rose with righteous anger. "That ain't been proven in any court," Morris said coldly. "Now step aside." Weezer met the Reverend's eyes and gave a small shake of his head. Without resistance, he offered his wrists to the deputy. The cuffs clicked shut. "This isn't justice," Alden called after them as Morris led Weezer away. "The Lord sees this day's work." Inside the clinic, Mary Beth stirred fitfully. Her eyes fluttered open to find Doctor Winston checking her pulse. "Welcome back," the doctor said gruffly, but relief softened his weathered face. "You gave us quite a scare." "Wesser." Her voice was barely a whisper, her throat raw from smoke. The doctor's expression tightened. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Billings. Your companion was arrested an hour ago." "No!" Mary Beth tried to sit up but fell back, head spinning. "What charges?" "Try not to excite yourself," Dr. Winston cautioned. "In your condition." "Please," she begged. "I need to see the sheriff. This is wrong." "You're in no state to go anywhere," the doctor said firmly. "Sheriff won't see you anyway. Says there's an ongoing investigation." Tears slid down Mary Beth's soot-stained cheeks. "Then send for Reverend Alden." "Already gone," came a soft voice from beside her bed. A native woman sat in a chair there, a well-worn Bible in her lap. "The Reverend rode out for Tucson at first light. Gone to fetch tribal lawyers," he said. Mary Beth studied the woman's kind face, her silver-streaked hair in a neat braid. "Who?" "I am Anna," the woman said. "A midwife. The Reverend asked me to watch over you and the little one." She patted Mary Beth's hand. "Rest now. The good Reverend will set things right." Dr. Winston nodded approval. "Listen to Anna. She knows her business." He headed for the door, pausing to add, "I'll do what I can to help. But for now, you must rest." The hours crawled by. Marybeth drifted in and out of consciousness, her dreams filled with smoke and flames. Each time she woke, Anna was there, speaking soft words of comfort or reading from the scripture by lamplight. "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death," Anna's steady voice recited, "I will fear no evil, for thou art with me." Marybeth clung to those familiar words like a lifeline. She pictured Weeser in a cell, alone but unbroken. She imagined Reverend Alden on the dusty road to Tucson, racing against time. And somewhere in the night, she found the strength to pray, not for herself, but for justice. The midnight oil burned low in Anna's lamp as she kept her quiet watch. Outside the clinic window, stars wheeled across the desert sky, bearing silent witness to both injustice and endurance. In her narrow clinic bed, Marybeth's hand rested protectively over her belly, sheltering the precious life within, a life that represented both love's triumph and hatred's bitter cost. Far down the street in the town jail's single cell, Weeser sat cross-legged on the floor. His eyes were closed, his breathing steady. He looked, for all the world, like a man at peace. But his heart beat with a warrior's resolve, and his prayers rose like smoke signals through the night. Prayers for his wife, their child, and the justice that must surely come with the dawn. 3 days crept by like molasses in winter. The doctor's clinic settled into a quiet rhythm of morning checks and evening visits. Marybeth's coughing fits gradually eased, though her chest still ached with every deep breath. On the morning of the 3rd day, she managed her first steps across the room, leaning heavily on Anna's steady arm. "Small victories," Anna murmured, helping her back to bed. "The Creator gives strength drop by drop, like morning dew." Dr. Winston arrived for his morning rounds, his spectacles fogged from the autumn chill outside. He checked Marybeth's pulse, listened to her breathing, and pressed gently around her abdomen. "The little one's still holding on," he said, his gruff voice softening. "Heart's beating strong, but you're not out of danger yet. Any strain could—" He trailed off, clearing his throat. "Best keep to bed, rest for now." Marybeth's hands curled protectively over her middle. "How much longer?" "Hard to say. Smoke damage takes time to heal, and with the anemia—" A commotion from the street interrupted him. Hoofbeats approached at a gallop. Voices rose in excitement. Marybeth struggled to sit up, hope fluttering in her chest. "Is it—" Anna peered out the window. "The Reverend has returned." Minutes later, Reverend Alden burst through the door, his clerical collar askew and trail dust coating his black coat. In his hands, he clutched a leather document case. "Thank the Lord you're improving," he said, catching his breath. "I've found it, Marybeth, the proof we need." Dr. Winston frowned. "Reverend, please, my patient needs rest." "No," Marybeth insisted. "I need to hear this." Alden pulled out several yellowed papers, hands trembling with exhaustion and urgency. "It's here in the Territorial Addendum Clause, dated 1872. Any marriage recognized by tribal custom becomes legally binding if witnessed by 2 persons of European descent." Hope blazed in Marybeth's heart. "But we didn't have—" "You did," Alden interrupted, eyes twinkling. "I was there that evening, watching from the cottonwoods. I saw your exchange of vows, the blanket ceremony, everything. I wanted to ensure all was proper, you see, and Sarah Winston was gathering herbs nearby. Remember, Doctor?" The doctor's eyes widened. "My wife did mention— Yes, she described a ceremony she glimpsed. Never knew it was you, Marybeth." 2 witnesses, Alden said triumphantly. "Both respected town citizens. The marriage is legal. These documents prove it." Marybeth's vision blurred with tears. "Then Weeser can be cleared of all charges, yes, but we'll need the town council to hear the evidence." Alden's face grew serious. "I've already spoken with Councilman Parker. He's sympathetic to our cause and has agreed to call an emergency session." "When?" Marybeth pushed herself straighter, ignoring the pain in her chest. "Tomorrow morning. Parker's sending notices now." Alden squeezed her hand. "Rest easy. Justice is coming." But justice, it seemed, had competition. Within hours, word of Alden's discovery spread through town like wildfire. Hank Billings stormed into the sheriff's office, his face dark with rage. "You can't let that Indian walk free on some dusty paper trick," he shouted loud enough for half the street to hear. "He needs to be tried proper, up in Tucson where they know how to handle his kind." Sheriff Taylor, a man more interested in peace than justice, began making arrangements. By sunset, a wagon was being prepared to transport Weezer to the territorial prison camp. When Dr. Winston delivered this news, Mary Beth threw off her covers. "I have to stop this. Please, doctor, release me." "Absolutely not," he said firmly. "You're still far too weak. The baby will have no father if we don't act." Tears streamed down her face. "Please, I'll rest after. I promise. But I need to be at that hearing." The doctor ran a hand through his grey hair, clearly torn. Anna spoke up from her corner. "I will stay with her. Every step. If she weakens, we bring her straight back." Dr. Winston sighed heavily. "Against my better judgment. But yes, tomorrow morning only. And you'll take a tonic first, something to give you strength." Mary Beth sank back against her pillows, relief warring with exhaustion. "Thank you." That evening, as Anna read from Psalms by lamplight, Mary Beth's thoughts drifted to Weezer in his cell. She pictured him sitting straight-backed and dignified, even in chains. Waiting. Trusting. Her hand rested on her belly, feeling the subtle flutter of life within. "Hold on," she whispered to both her husband and child. "Just hold on until morning." Outside her window, the sun set in a blaze of orange and purple, painting the church steeple in golden light. Town council notices fluttered on posts and doors. In his study, Reverend Alden polished his spectacles and arranged his documents with trembling hands, praying for wisdom and courage. And in the jail, Weezer sat cross-legged on his thin mattress, eyes closed in meditation. When Deputy Morris rattled his keys and announced gruffly, "Pack up. You're heading to Tucson at first light." Weezer simply nodded once. He had endured worse than prison camps, but the thought of leaving Mary Beth now, when she carried their child and needed him most, that pain cut deeper than any chains. Still, his face remained serene. He had learned long ago that the Creator's justice moved in its own time, like water wearing away stone. All through the night, the town hummed with tension. Tomorrow would bring either healing or deeper wounds to their community. In her clinic bed, Mary Beth drifted between sleep and prayer, one hand always protective over her precious burden. Dawn approached like a held breath, waiting to see which way the wind would blow, toward reconciliation or ruin. Grey shadows crept across San Pedro Crossing as Mary Beth pulled on her best dress with trembling fingers. Each button felt like lifting a stone. Anna supported her elbow while she slipped her feet into worn leather shoes. "Slowly now," Anna cautioned, wrapping a shawl around Mary Beth's shoulders. "The medicine needs time to work." Dr. Winston's tonic sat bitter on her tongue, but Mary Beth felt its warmth spreading through her limbs. She touched her belly, drawing strength from the tiny life within. "We have to hurry. They'll move him at first light." The walk to the sheriff's office took 3 times longer than usual. Every few steps, Mary Beth had to pause, letting waves of dizziness pass. Anna kept one arm around her waist, murmuring prayers in her native tongue. The street was empty except for a few early risers heading to work at the livery or railroad office. Dawn painted the mountains purple when they finally reached the jailhouse. Already they could hear movement inside, boots on floorboards, keys jingling, low voices. Mary Beth's heart hammered against her ribs. "Help me sit," she whispered to Anna. With careful movements, they lowered her onto the wooden steps. She positioned herself squarely in front of the door, her skirts spread wide. Anna stood behind her like a guardian angel. Minutes crawled by. More townspeople emerged from their homes, drawn by curiosity or conscience. Reverend Alden appeared, document case clutched to his chest, and quickly took up position beside Mary Beth. The door rattled. Deputy Morris's voice carried through the wood. "Coming through with the prisoner." "No," Mary Beth called out, her voice stronger than she felt. "You're not taking him anywhere." The door opened part way, hindered by her presence. Sheriff Taylor's weathered face appeared in the gap. "Miss Billings, move aside. This is official business." "Mrs. Nate," she corrected firmly, "and I have official business of my own." Her hands shook as she pulled out the copied statute Alden had given her. "This is territorial law, Sheriff. Will you hear it?" A small crowd had gathered now. Whispers rippled through the morning air. Sheriff Taylor's jaw worked beneath his mustache. "Make it quick." Mary Beth held the paper close to her face, willing her voice not to waver. "By Territorial Statute Amendment of 1872, Section 4, any marriage performed under tribal custom and witnessed by two persons of European descent shall be recognized as legally binding in all territories and counties herein." "That paper don't mean nothing without—" Taylor began. "I witnessed the ceremony." Reverend Alden stepped forward, his quiet voice carrying across the hushed street. "I watched from the cottonwoods as they exchanged vows according to Apache custom. Mrs. Winston was there as well, gathering herbs. We are both willing to testify." "It's true." Sarah Winston pushed through the crowd, her grey hair escaping its pins. "I saw it all. It was beautiful and proper, done with real love and respect." Movement rippled through the onlookers. Councilman Parker, who had been watching from the boardwalk, cleared his throat. "Sheriff, as acting representative of the town council, I'm ordering a halt to this transfer pending an emergency hearing. The law appears clear." Sheriff Taylor's face darkened. "Now see here. The law," Parker repeated firmly, "is clear. Release Mr. Nate to house arrest until the hearing. Unless you'd prefer I wire the territorial governor about obstruction of statute." Long seconds ticked by. Mary Beth's vision swam, but she kept herself upright through sheer will. Finally, Taylor stepped back. "Morris, get them shackles off. But he stays in town, you hear?" Mary Beth sagged against Anna's legs, her strength finally giving out. Through the open door, she heard chains clattering, then familiar footsteps. Weezer appeared in the doorway, rubbing his wrists. His eyes found hers immediately. Without a word, he knelt beside her on the steps. His gentle hands cupped her face, thumbs wiping away tears she hadn't realized were falling. The crowd began to disperse, some muttering, others nodding in approval. "You shouldn't have come," he whispered. "You're not strong enough." "I'm stronger with you," she answered, leaning into his touch. Reverend Alden stepped forward. "My home is open to you both. It's not much, but there's a spare room, and my housekeeper makes excellent soup." They helped Mary Beth to her feet. The walk to Alden's modest house passed in a blur of exhaustion and relief. By the time they settled her in a clean bed, she could barely keep her eyes open. She slept through most of the day, waking occasionally to take broth or medicine. Each time, Weezer sat nearby, carving something small from a piece of cedar. The familiar smell of wood shavings mixed with the scent of fresh bread from the kitchen below. Evening arrived with long shadows and cooling air. Mary Beth woke to find Weezer still beside her, but something had changed. In the fading light, she saw wetness on his cheeks. "Beloved?" She reached for him. His shoulders shook as he took her hand. All the fear and pain he'd held inside during his imprisonment now poured out in silent tears. She had never seen him cry before, not during the burning of their home, not during his arrest, not even when they'd first learned of the baby. "I thought," his voice caught, "when they said Tucson, I thought of you alone, of our child growing up without—" He couldn't continue. Mary Beth pulled his hand to her belly, pressing it there firmly. "Feel that? We're still here. All of us." Through his tears, Weezer smiled. The baby kicked against his palm as if in greeting. Outside, the sun set behind the mountains. Lamplight glowed in windows across town. In the kitchen below, they could hear Reverend Alden's housekeeper singing an old hymn while she prepared supper. They sat together in the growing darkness, hands entwined over the promise of new life. Tomorrow would bring the hearing, more battles to fight. But for now, in this quiet room, they had all they needed, each other, and hope as steady as a heartbeat. Morning sunlight streamed through the church hall's tall windows, casting long shadows across worn floorboards. The space, usually reserved for Sunday services and ladies' aid meetings, had been transformed. Row after row of chairs faced a makeshift council table where 5 town officials sat with stern expressions. Mary Beth smoothed her borrowed dress, one of Sarah Winston's, altered hastily to fit, and tried to steady her breathing. Beside her, Weeser sat straight-backed in his best shirt, hands folded quietly in his lap. His stillness gave her strength. Reverend Alden stood at the front, leaning slightly on his cane. His voice, though weathered by age, carried clear and strong through the packed hall. "I've served this community for 23 years," he began, meeting the gaze of long-time parishioners. "I've baptized your children, buried your dead, and shared both feast and famine. You know me as a man who speaks truth, even when that truth is hard to hear." He paused, letting his words settle. The creak of chairs and rustling of skirts filled the silence. "Today, we gather to judge whether a marriage performed under tribal custom, witnessed by God and Christian souls, holds weight in our town. But make no mistake, we're really here to judge ourselves. What do we truly believe about love, about justice, about the treaties we've signed and the promises we've made?" Councilman Parker shifted uncomfortably. Sheriff Taylor studied his boots. In the back row, Hank Billings' face grew steadily redder. "I have here," Alden continued, lifting a stack of papers, "copies of 3 territorial treaties, all promising to honor tribal customs and family bonds. I have witness statements from Mrs. Winston and myself, testifying to the proper and sacred exchange of vows between Weeser Natey and Mary Beth Billings. And I have this—" He held up a worn Bible, "which tells us that God shows no partiality, that love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some nodded slowly. Others frowned and whispered behind raised hands. "We cannot claim to be God-fearing people while treating his children as less than human. We cannot preach about marriage's sanctity while trying to tear apart a union blessed by both tribal custom and Christian witness. The hypocrisy stains us all." Mrs. Peterson, the baker's wife, dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Even gruff old Tom Wheeler, who'd never shown much kindness to tribal folk, looked thoughtful. "The law is clear," Alden concluded. "But more importantly, what is right is clear. I ask this council to uphold not just the letter of our treaties, but the spirit of our professed faith." He stepped back, nodding to Weeser. The room grew perfectly still as the tall Apache man rose and moved to the front. He carried himself with quiet dignity, facing the council without flinching from their scrutiny. "I have prepared words," Weeser said, his English careful and clear. "I ask only to live in peace with my wife. Let the earth decide the rest." The simplicity and humility of his statement hung in the air. Several council members exchanged glances. Mary Beth felt tears prick her eyes at the gentle strength in his voice. Councilman Parker cleared his throat. "We'll take a brief recess to deliberate. Please remain seated." The 5 officials filed into the pastor's study. Minutes crawled by like hours. Mary Beth could feel the weight of stares, some sympathetic, some hostile, some merely curious. She kept her eyes forward, one hand resting protectively over her growing belly. When the council returned, Parker's face was unreadable. He adjusted his spectacles and unfolded a piece of paper. "After reviewing the evidence and testimony presented, this council has reached a decision by majority vote of 3-2. The room held its collective breath. The marriage between Weeser Natey and Mary Beth Billings, performed under tribal custom and witnessed by Reverend Ezra Alden and Mrs. Sarah Winston, is hereby recognized as legally binding within the territory of Arizona and the town of San Pedro Crossing." A mixture of gasps and mutters filled the hall. Parker raised his hand for silence. Furthermore, the land claim held by Wisa Natai through tribal inheritance and treaty right is confirmed and shall be recorded in county records as such. This includes the creek access and all improvements thereon. From the back of the room came the sound of a chair scraping roughly across the floor. Hank Billings stood, face flushed dark as a thundercloud. Without a word, he stormed toward the door, boots striking the floorboards like hammer blows. Marybeth watched him go, her heart heavy, but her spine straight. She had hoped, somehow, that he might finally see past his prejudice. But some wounds took longer to heal than others. Wisa's warm hand covered hers. She turned to find his dark eyes full of understanding and love. They had won their right to be together, to keep their land, but the victory felt bittersweet without her father's blessing. People began to file out, some stopping to offer quiet congratulations, others hurrying past with averted eyes. Reverend Alden approached with a tired smile. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," he said softly. "Sometimes justice comes slow, but it comes." "Thank you," Marybeth whispered, squeezing his gnarled hand. "For everything." Wisa helped her up carefully, supporting her weight as another wave of dizziness passed. Dr. Winston had warned her to rest as much as possible, but this hearing couldn't wait. Outside, their borrowed wagon waited in the autumn sunshine. Wisa lifted her onto the seat as gently as if she were made of spun glass. The leather reins felt familiar in his hands as he clucked to the horses. They rode in comfortable silence through town, past the general store where the clerk still wouldn't meet their eyes, past the saloon where men paused their card games to watch them pass. At the edge of town, the road turned to follow the creek, winding toward what had been their home. The sight of it still made Marybeth's chest ache. Where their little shack had stood, only black ash and scorched earth remained. The vegetable patch was trampled, the careful stack of wood for winter scattered and partially burned. But as they drew closer, she noticed something new. Tiny green shoots were pushing up through the ash, nature's first attempts at renewal. The creek still burbled its endless song, and birds still nested in the cottonwoods along its banks. Wisa helped her down from the wagon. Together they stood on their land, truly theirs now, by law as well as love, and surveyed the work ahead. They would need to clear the ash, salvage what they could, start over from the ground up. But they would do it together, with their child growing strong beneath Marybeth's heart, and hope blooming like those green shoots through the ashes of the past. The autumn days grew shorter as Wisa worked from sunrise to sunset, rebuilding their home piece by piece. His hands, strong and sure, shaped rough-cut boards into walls and rafters. This time, he laid a proper stone foundation first, working methodically to ensure each rock fit snugly against its neighbors. At first, they worked alone, but on the third morning, Tom Wheeler's wagon creaked to a stop near their clearing. Without a word, he unloaded a stack of fresh-cut lumber and nodded once before driving away. The next day, Mrs. Peterson appeared with a basket of bread and preserves, her eyes kind as she pressed them into Marybeth's hands. "For the baby," she said simply, then added in a lower voice, "I was wrong before, about everything. I'm sorry." The gestures of support continued, small but meaningful. The cooper left 2 water barrels by the creek. The blacksmith's wife brought a box of nails and hinges. Even the general store clerk, who had ignored them for weeks, sent his boy over with a sack of flour and dried beans. Sarah Armstrong, the new school mom, visited one afternoon as Marybeth rested in their temporary tent. "I'll take over your lessons at the reservation," she offered, her young face earnest. "The children miss you, but they understand you need to rest. I've been studying some Apache words. Perhaps you could help me with the pronunciation." Marybeth's eyes welled with grateful tears. She had worried about her students, knowing how important consistency was for their learning. "Thank you. she whispered, sharing what she knew of the language while Sarah took careful notes. As the walls of their new home rose, Marybeth's strength returned gradually. Dr. Winston visited weekly, nodding with satisfaction at her improving color and the healthy movement of the baby. She still tired easily but could sit outside now, watching Weisa work while she mended what clothes they'd salvaged from the fire. The new shack took shape slowly but surely. Weisa built it larger than the first, with proper windows and a stone hearth that would hold warmth through the winter nights. He worked with quiet determination, each nail and board a testament to their resilience. The town's slow acceptance felt like a gentle thaw after a hard freeze. Yet one absence remained stark. Her father never appeared, never sent word. Sometimes Marybeth caught sight of him in town, but he would turn away, shoulders stiff with unrelenting pride. One evening, as the first snow dusted the grass like sugar, Weisa sat by their new hearth with pieces of cedar wood spread before him. His knife moved steadily, carefully, shaping what would become their child's cradle. Marybeth watched his hands work, while she stitched a tiny bonnet from fabric she'd salvaged from the fire, a bit of her mother's old dress that had somehow survived. The next morning, while Weisa checked their winter stores, Marybeth walked slowly to the riverbank. From her pocket, she drew a letter written on precious paper, words to her mother who had passed when Marybeth was just 16. "Mama," she had written, "I wish you could see us now. I think you would understand this love, how it's bigger than what people say we should or shouldn't do. I'm going to be a mother too, and I promise to love my child the way you loved me, with open arms and an open heart." She tucked the letter beneath a river stone, letting the water's song carry her words to wherever her mother's spirit dwelled. Above her, snow continued to fall softly, each flake a promise of renewal. December brought bitter winds that howled through the pines, testing the strength of their new home. Inside, Marybeth sat by the warm hearth, her hand resting on her growing belly. The baby's movements had grown stronger, like little bird wings fluttering beneath her skin, then shifting to firm kicks that made her smile despite their force. "Someone's eager to meet the world," she whispered, watching the flames dance in the fireplace. The winter stores Weisa had gathered, dried meat, root vegetables, and preserved fruit, filled their small pantry. Though modest, their home felt rich with promise. One morning, as frost painted delicate patterns on their windows, Weisa prepared for a journey. A Navajo healer named Walking Deer, known for her knowledge of medicines for expectant mothers, had agreed to share her remedies. The trip would take 3 days, crossing snow-dusted hills to reach the healer's distant camp. "I don't like leaving you," Weisa said softly, checking his saddlebags one final time. The morning sun cast long shadows through the trees. "I'll be fine," Marybeth assured him, pressing a wrapped package of cornbread into his hands. "The baby and I will wait right here." After Weisa rode out, Marybeth kept herself busy with small tasks, mending, reading her Bible, and tending the fire. The second day brought heavy clouds and more snow. As afternoon shadows lengthened, an unexpected sound broke the silence: boots on their wooden steps. Her heart jumped when she heard the familiar, heavy tread. Through the window, she saw her father's broad-shouldered figure, standing uncertainly at their door. He looked different somehow, thinner, older. His face was weathered, and his eyes, when he finally met her gaze, were watery and uncertain. Marybeth opened the door slowly. Hank stood there, clutching a jar of preserved peaches, her mother's old recipe. Neither spoke for a long moment. "May I come in?" he asked finally, his voice rough with disuse. She nodded, stepping aside. Hank entered cautiously, as if crossing into foreign territory. His eyes took in the neat cabin, lingering on the half-finished cradle near the fire. Without a word, he settled into a chair by the hearth, placing the jar carefully on the table beside him. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the crackling of the fire. Marybeth continued her mending, stealing glances at her father's face. The proud, angry man who had cast her out seemed, diminished somehow, replaced by someone older and more vulnerable. Hours passed this way, the quiet broken only by occasional murmured comments about the weather or the strength of the fire. As the sun began to set, they heard hoofbeats approaching. Weise had returned early, his saddlebags full of carefully wrapped herbs and medicines. Hank stood abruptly when Weise entered, his body tense. But there was no anger in his face now, only a deep, complicated sadness. He looked at his daughter, then at Weise, then back to Mary Beth. "I came to see the one thing I didn't ruin," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. Without waiting for a response, he moved toward the door. On the threshold he paused, reaching into his coat. With trembling hands, he placed a small carved rattle on the doorstep, a simple thing made of smooth wood and dried beans, worn smooth by years of use. Mary Beth recognized it instantly, her own baby rattle, the one her father had carved before she was born. Without another word, Hank stepped into the gathering dusk, leaving the rattle as a silent offering of hope. January brought a vicious blizzard that painted the world white. Wind screamed through the pines, piling snow in deep drifts against the cabin walls. Inside, Mary Beth paced slowly, one hand pressed against her lower back. The baby wasn't due for weeks, but something felt different. "It's time," the Navajo midwife, Grandmother Yazzie, announced calmly. She had arrived just hours before the storm, as if guided by ancient wisdom. The little one chooses her own path. Weise rode out into the howling storm to fetch Reverend Alden, while Grandmother Yazzie prepared her medicines and clean linens. By the time they returned, Mary Beth's labor had intensified. The Reverend's presence brought comfort, his quiet prayers mixing with Grandmother Yazzie's soft chants. Hours passed in a blur of pain and determination. The wind rattled the windows, but inside, the air was warm with fellowship and hope. Grandmother Yazzie's skilled hands and gentle voice guided Mary Beth through each moment. Weise held her hand, speaking soft words of encouragement in both English and Apache. Just before dawn, as the storm began to ease, a new sound filled the cabin, the strong, clear cry of a baby girl. She was small, but her lungs were mighty, her voice rising above the dying wind like a declaration of life itself. "Sarah," Mary Beth whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Sarah Nate." The name bridged their worlds. Sarah for Mary Beth's mother, Nate for Weise's grandmother. The baby's skin was the color of dawn, her hair as black as midnight. Grandmother Yazzie swaddled the infant in soft blankets, while Reverend Alden offered a prayer of thanksgiving. Weise touched his daughter's tiny face with trembling fingers, whispering blessings in his native tongue. Word spread quickly through the awakening town. By mid-morning, despite the deep snow, visitors began arriving. The mayor's wife appeared with a bundle of fine cloth and a warm smile. "For the little one," she said, placing it beside Mary Beth's bed. Even the mayor himself stopped by, awkwardly offering congratulations and a small package wrapped in brown paper. As evening approached, heavy boots creaked on the porch steps. Hank stood in the doorway, snow dusting his shoulders, a rocking chair balanced carefully in his arms. His eyes were red-rimmed, his expression uncertain. Weise met him at the door. The two men regarded each other for a long moment before Weise stepped aside, welcoming him in with a silent nod. Hank set the rocker down gently near the fire. "It was her mother's," he said gruffly, running his hand along the smooth wood. "Been in the barn too long." Mary Beth watched from her bed as her father approached, his steps hesitant. Sarah Nate lay sleeping in her arms, tiny fingers curled into fists. "Would you like to hold her?" Mary Beth asked softly. Hank's hands shook as he carefully took his granddaughter. The baby stirred, opening dark eyes to study his weathered face. Something in Hank's expression crumbled. "I'm sorry," he whispered, first to the baby, then looking up at Mary Beth with tears falling freely. "I was wrong. So wrong. You made something good in spite of me." Marybeth felt tears spill down her own cheeks as she nodded, unable to speak. Wisa moved to stand beside them, placing one hand on Hank's shoulder. The older man reached up to grasp it, a gesture of peace that needed no words. Outside, the storm had passed completely. Moonlight sparkled on fresh snow, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to welcome the night. Inside the warm cabin, 4 generations of healing gathered around a tiny life that represented hope for a better tomorrow. Spring painted the valley in soft greens and golds, washing away winter's stern memory. Morning dew sparkled on new grass, and wildflowers dotted the meadow where the creek meandered past the cabin. Life had settled into gentle rhythms, marked by Sarah Natai's growing smiles and the daily tasks that kept their small homestead alive. Wisa worked the soil with practiced care, his strong hands creating neat furrows in the dark earth. The bean seeds went in one by one, each placement a prayer for sustenance. He had learned these particular beans from his grandmother, hardy plants that could withstand both drought and early frost. As he worked, he spoke softly in Apache, teaching the earth's ways to his daughter, who watched from a blanket in the shade of a cottonwood tree. Marybeth sat beside Sarah Natai in her rocking chair, which had found a permanent home on their wide front porch. Her voice carried clearly in the spring air as she read from her restored Bible, the pages worn smooth with love and use. The baby cooed at the sound, reaching up to catch dust motes dancing in the sunlight. "Consider the lilies of the field," Marybeth read, pausing to smile at a butterfly that landed on the porch rail. "They toil not, neither do they spin." Sarah Natai's laugh interrupted the verse, a sound pure as creek water over stones. Sunday brought clear skies and the gentle toll of church bells. After services, the family gathered at the cabin, where Hank had taken to spending his afternoons. He sat in the new rocking chair, Sarah Natai nestled in his arms, both of them watching a pair of wrens who had claimed the cabin's eaves as their own. The birds darted back and forth, carrying bits of grass and twigs to build their nest. Sarah Natai pointed and babbled, her dark eyes following their quick movements. Hank's weathered face softened with each of her delighted squeals. Pete Murphy, one of Hank's ranch hands, rode past on his way to check fence lines. He reined his horse to a stop, tipping his hat to the scene on the porch. A knowing smile crossed his face as he remembered that day at the church, now nearly a year past. "Say, Hank," Pete called out, his voice carrying a gentle tease, "ain't that the girl you once called a disappointment?" The words could have cut deep, could have reopened old wounds. But Hank just smiled, tears gathering in the corners of his eyes as he looked down at his granddaughter, then toward the doorway where Marybeth stood watching. "Yeah," he said softly, his voice rough with emotion. "Best disappointment I ever had." Marybeth crossed the porch to touch her father's shoulder, forgiveness flowing as naturally as the spring breeze. Inside, the main room glowed with afternoon light. A new wooden cross hung above the stone mantel, carved by Wisa's careful hands from cedar wood. It represented not just faith, but the bridge between cultures, between past hurts and present healing. They gathered inside, drawn by some unspoken understanding. Hank still cradled Sarah Natai, who had drifted to sleep against his chest. Wisa stood tall beside his wife, soil still fresh on his hands from planting. Marybeth reached for both her husband and her father, completing the circle. As one, they bowed their heads in prayer, their silence filled with gratitude for this moment, for the miracle of love that had overcome pride, for the strength of family that had conquered fear, for the simple grace of new beginnings. If something in this story whispered to your spirit, stay a while. Subscribe and come back tomorrow. The next story may be the one you didn't know you needed.